318 curves. That is the number you need to keep in your head for the next hour. 318 distinct, dangerous turns packed into a single 11-mile stretch of asphalt.
And not just any asphalt. We are talking about U.S. Route 129, specifically the stretch crossing the Tennessee-North Carolina border. It's legendary.
Right, the Tail of the Dragon. I looked up the stats on this road, and it's basically a pilgrimage site for motorcyclists and sports car enthusiasts. But if you make a mistake on one of those 318 curves, you're not just going off the road, you're hitting the tree of shame, where bikers hang the broken parts of their crashed machines.
It's a graveyard of egos, essentially.
Exactly. Now imagine taking that stretch of road, which is already lethal at 40 miles per hour, and turning it into the climax of a political thriller where a souped-up Pontiac Firebird is dodging not just traffic, but missiles. Yes, actual military-grade missiles.
That is the world of Tale of the Dragon, the 2012 novel by Rich Hoffman. And honestly, Noah, calling it just a novel feels like we're missing the point. Hoffman himself calls it faction.
Right. Faction, fiction meets fact, which sounds like a marketing term, but with Hoffman, it seems to be a genuine philosophy. So today, we aren't just talking about a car chase book. We're talking about a very specific slice of American political anger wrapped up in the smell of burning rubber and, well, heavy-handed libertarian metaphors.
It is definitely heavy-handed, but that is part of the charm, or the warning, depending on how you read it.
So let's start with the man behind the wheel, or rather the typewriter. Who is Rich Hoffman?
You can't separate the book from the author here. Rich Hoffman is a fascinating figure based in Cincinnati, Ohio. He's not just a writer, he's a self-described philosopher and activist who earned the nickname the Tax Killer.
The Tax Killer. That sounds like a wrestling villain.
It does, doesn't it? But it comes from his real-world political work fighting tax levies and school bond issues in Ohio. He runs a blog called The Overman Warrior, which gives you a hint at his philosophical leanings. He's deeply influenced by Friedrich Nietzsche and Ayn Rand. He views the world as a battle between the productive individual and the parasitic system.
Okay, so this isn't just someone who likes fast cars. He's someone who sees the government as an active antagonist in daily life.
Precisely. In his author bio on Goodreads, he explicitly states that he uses his own frequent altercations with the law to explore the meanings of freedom. He doesn't mean he's robbing banks. He means fighting zoning laws, traffic tickets, and tax codes. He sees these administrative roles as the tentacles of tyranny. And Tale of the Dragon is basically his manifesto disguised as an action movie.
So let's get into the story. We have our hero, Rick Stevens. Is he the overman figure?
He's the chrysalis of one. Rick Stevens is introduced as a NASCAR-loving everyman. He's a guy who played by the rules his whole life, dreamed of racing, but got ground down by the mundane reality of existence. He's the guy doing everything right, but getting nowhere.
Standard underdog setup.
Until he crosses paths with Governor Wellington Royce. Now, Royce is a fantastic caricature of political evil. He's the governor of Tennessee, but he has eyes on the White House. And his strategy for getting there is what Hoffman would call the Sheriff of Nottingham model.
Which is?
Revenue generation through law enforcement. Royce isn't serving the people, he's fleecing them. According to the plot summaries and Hoffman's own blog discussions, Royce beefs up the police force in the Great Smoky Mountains specifically to generate citations from tourists. He's turning the police force into a tax collection agency to fund his political rise.
That is a very specific grievance. I feel like anyone who has ever gotten the speeding ticket in a small town is nodding their head right now.
That's the hook. Hoffman takes a universal annoyance, speed traps, and elevates it to a battle for the soul of America. Rick Stevens gets thrown in this web. He's thrown in jail, abused, and set up. The system tries to break him.
But then comes the twist. The setup for the action isn't just, I'm breaking out of jail. It's weirder than that.
It is. Rick accepts an offer from the governor's political enemies, shadowy figures who want to expose Royce. They give Rick $20 million.
$20 million. That is a lot of speeding tickets.
The goal is to declare war on the highway patrol. Not a war of violence initially, but a war of humiliation. Rick builds the car of his dreams, a modified Firebird, and basically dares the entire state of Tennessee to catch him.
I love the specificity of the car. It had to be a Firebird, right? It couldn't be a Honda Civic.
It screams Americana. And this is where the technical breakdown of the book gets interesting. Hoffman isn't writing hard sci-fi, but he writes gearhead fiction. The car represents ultimate individual liberty. It's powerful, it's loud, and it's faster than the government. The chase that ensues is described in reviews as the greatest car chase in history, spanning the mountains, weaving through those 318 curves of the Dragon.
I read a snippet of a review from a blog called Becoming American, which is actually run by Hoffman's son-in-law. He described reading the book as holding onto the pages for dear life and compared it to The Dukes of Hazzard meets Smokey and the Bandit.
That comparison is perfect, but Hoffman adds a layer of lethal seriousness that the Dukes of Hazzard never had. In the show, the police were bumbling buffoons. In Tale of the Dragon, the police are agents of a tyrannical state that is willing to kill you for disobedience. The stakes escalate from pull over to launch the missiles.
Wait, let's go back to the missiles. Does the governor of Tennessee actually have air-to-surface missiles?
In Hoffman's faction, the lines between local police, federal military, and political power are completely blurred. It speaks to a very modern anxiety about the militarization of police. When Rick refuses to stop, the state doesn't just set up a roadblock, they treat him as an enemy combatant. There's a scene described where helicopters from North Carolina join the hunt, and Rick fears being gunned down like Bonnie and Clyde.
So it ceases to be a car chase and becomes a war.
Exactly, and this is where the philosophy comes in. Hoffman explains in interviews that the best way to understand freedom is to have a character break every law and see what happens. He wants to show the disproportionate response of the state. If you truly disobey, the mask of public safety slips, and you see the brute force underneath.
It's interesting because you mentioned Ayn Rand earlier. This sounds like Atlas Shrugged if John Galt drove a Trans Am.
That is honestly the best summary of the book I've heard. Rick Stevens is a John Galt figure, but instead of stopping the motor of the world, he's revving his own motor to outrun the world. There's a romance subplot too, with a character named Renee. They have this exchange in the car where Rick says, as long as that engine ran and Rick was behind the wheel, they had a chance to live. The engine is life. Stopping is death.
Let's talk about the reception of this book, because it's not a New York Times bestseller, but it seems to have a very intense cult following.
It does. It taps into a specific vein of American culture, the Patriot movement, the Tea Party demographic. Remember, this came out in 2012, right around the height of that political wave. Larry the Cable Guy even visited the real Tale of the Dragon Road. And there's a connection Hoffman mentions on his blog about Larry capturing that same spirit of Americana.
Larry the Cable Guy as a literary critic. I didn't have that on my bingo card.
But it makes sense. The book appeals to people who feel like real America is being regulated out of existence. Reviewers on Amazon, like one cited on Hoffman's site, say things like, "Thank you, Mr. Hoffman, for hope. Hope for real patriots." They aren't reading it for the prose style. They're reading it for the validation of their worldview.
I want to dig into that faction concept again, because Hoffman isn't just writing this for fun. He really believes this is how the world works. I saw he has another book called The Symposium of Justice.
Right. The Symposium of Justice is even more dense philosophically. It features a character named Cliffhanger, who has these 10 rules to live by. Hoffman sees his fiction as a vehicle for teaching his philosophy. He's trying to wake people up. In Tale of the Dragon, the tail isn't just a road, it's the beast. The dragon is the state, and Rick is pulling its tail.
That's a great image, but I have to play devil's advocate here. Isn't there something a little dangerous about this fantasy? The idea that the only way to be free is to drive 100 miles per hour and endanger everyone else on the road?
That is the central tension of the book, and I think Hoffman would argue, who is endangering whom? Is the danger the man driving fast, or the government that launches missiles at its own citizens to stop a speeding ticket? Hoffman forces you to choose a side. If you say Rick is reckless, you're siding with Governor Royce. If you side with Rick, you have to accept total chaos.
It's a binary choice, liberty or safety.
And Hoffman chooses liberty every single time, even if it means driving off a cliff. There's a very Nietzschean element to it, the will to power. Rick Stevens isn't just surviving, he's asserting his dominance over his environment. The curves of the dragon are a physical test of his will.
Speaking of the curves, I want to circle back to the setting. We talked about the road in the intro, but how does the book utilize the actual geography? Because 318 curves in 11 miles is a lot of geography.
The road is a character. Hoffman uses the geography masterfully to level the playing field. A police cruiser might have more horsepower, or a helicopter might be faster in a straight line, but on the Dragon, it's about skill. It's about knowing the terrain. Rick survives because he is one with the road, whereas the state forces are clumsy intruders. It's a classic guerrilla warfare tactic applied to motorsport.
It reminds me of the Battle of Thermopylae, a small force using a narrow pass to hold off a massive army.
That is a perfect analogy. The dragon is Rick's Thermopylae. And just like the Spartans, Rick is fighting for a code of honor that the Persians, or in this case, the governor, don't understand.
But unlike the Spartans, well, I guess I shouldn't spoil the ending. But does he die? You mentioned earlier that reviewers said the ending was perfect.
I won't spoil the specifics, but I will say this. The ending validates the struggle. In a lot of noir or political thrillers, the protagonist gets crushed by the system because that's realistic. Chinatown, for example. But Hoffman writes romantic realism, what he calls faction. He believes heroes can win, or at least that their defiance matters. So the ending leaves you with that sense of possibility.
It's optimistic libertarianism.
Which is rare, right? Usually libertarian fiction is dystopian, like at 1984 or Atlas Shrugged, where everything has to collapse before it gets better. Hoffman offers a moment of triumph in the here and now.
I think that's why it resonates with his readers. It's not just complaining about taxes. It's a fantasy of beating the tax man. It's the ultimate don't tread on me flag waving out the window of a Firebird.
And let's not ignore the cultural legacy here. This book sits in a weird space between self-published manifesto and regional cult hit. It captures a mood that was very prevalent in 2012 and is perhaps even stronger now. The feeling that the average guy is being hunted.
And that the only refuge is the open road. It's a very American idea. The frontier is closed, space is regulated, so the only frontier left is speed.
Speed and technical competence. Rick builds the car himself. He doesn't buy it. That's crucial. He uses his hands and his mind to create the tool of his liberation. It's a celebration of competence.
So, if you're not a libertarian and you don't own a muscle car, is this book worth reading, or is it just preaching to the choir?
I think it's worth reading as a cultural artifact. If you want to understand the emotional core of anti-government sentiment in America, this book explains it better than 1,000 op-eds. It shows you the romance of that worldview. It shows you why it feels good to be the rebel. You don't have to agree with Hoffman's politics to feel the adrenaline of the chase.
That's a fair point. We often look at political differences through policy papers, but fiction shows us the dreams and fears underneath.
And honestly, the action scenes are just fun. Who doesn't want to see a corrupt governor get humiliated by a guy in a Firebird? It's cathartic.
It really is. Before we wrap up, I want to mention one other thing I found. Hoffman has a book called Latte Sipping Prostitutes. I have to know.
Oh, that's part of the Curse of Fort 7 Mile series. It's another deep dive into the system conspiracy theories. Hoffman is nothing if not provocative with his titles, but Tale of the Dragon remains his most accessible work because it's grounded in that physical reality of the road.
Well, accessible is a relative term when you're dodging missiles.
True, but at least the road is real. You can go drive US 129 today. Just maybe don't try to do it at 100 miles per hour.
And please, check your rearview mirror for helicopters.
Always good advice.
Rich Hoffman's Tale of the Dragon. It's part thriller, part manifesto, and completely unapologetic. Whether you see it as a warning or a blueprint, it's a ride you won't forget.
It certainly leaves marks on the pavement.
If you enjoyed this deep dive into the high-octane world of political faction, send this episode to that one friend who is always complaining about speed traps. They'll thank you for it.